live? Are we live? Are we live? Are we live? We are live. Here I am with David, and David I met probably 12 months ago. We got introduced by a mutual friend, and the actual chemistry ignitement of ideas and the future of question and the how might we questions kept on popping up. And David comes from positive education. He's at Geelong Grammar at the moment. Thanks, Dave, just for having a 30-minute conversation. We already went down a bit of a rabbit hole before this call around the future of education and positive education. And obviously you're in a classroom right now with our students. Maybe a bit of a background around what you've been doing at Geelong Grammar and past, and kind of, your snapshot right now of education.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Thanks. Great to have a chat. I think it's weird. I literally am in a classroom looking out across the fields of the school empty, and it's forcing us, during this crisis to have a think about what is the purpose of schooling. And I think, that's the biggest question of all. And educators have been stumbling, fumbling, discussing, challenged by that question for a long time. But I think, to be honest, when the modern school was created by Horace Mann and others, over 100 years ago, the purpose of school was pretty clear. It was to create a supply of relatively educated, relatively compliant factory workers. And for 100 years or so, that worked really efficiently and effectively. And school was about creating. It was a factory line, and Sir Ken Robbins and others have spoken about this at length. But schools had a very clear purpose. I think as society and culture has evolved significantly in the last 30, 40 years, particularly, we've seen a falling away of a real deep sense of purpose. And I think in many ways, schools continue to do great work in teaching skills and knowledge, but not sure that education writ large has really kept up with the pace of change in society. And so we're still doing things largely the same way that we've done when you and I were at school and when our parents were at school. And if you walk into this classroom, literally where I'm sitting now, you'll see a whiteboard on the thing, a 20-year-old projector sitting up there, and this is a very sophisticated, one of Australia's leading schools here at Geelong Grammar School. But largely we're doing things the same way we've done things for the last 30, 40 years. So I work in a field called positive education, which is, as we were sort of talking about a few minutes ago, positive education is a disruptive movement which has really started to challenge the purpose of schooling and education. And positive education is based on the science of positive psychology and other wellbeing sciences. And largely, fundamentally, positive education says that the purpose of schooling, really the sole purpose of schooling, is to create flourishing humans that can contribute in a meaningful way to creating a better world. So the science of positive psychology is the science of human flourishing. And so positive education is the science of humans flourishing in schools. And so we're trying to leverage a whole range of human sciences, including cognitive psychology, behavioral psychology, behavioral economics, neuroscience, and positive psychology, amongst others, trying to look at the best fields of human psychology or human science, and then work out how we can bring that to life in a school setting in a sustainable way to create flourishing humans, and that's educators and students as well. So that's the field I've been working in, and most of my work is in supporting schools and governments around the world in bringing this science of wellbeing to life in a school setting. So that's what I have been doing for the last 5 years. Obviously, for the last 5 weeks, that's been pretty different because, like your work, Steve, which largely is about face-to-face contact and bringing humans together, my work's the same. And so obviously that's fundamentally shifted. And so we're in a bit of a limbo state at the moment where we're just trying to work out how we can best continue to, support schools, educators in this challenging time, but also think about the other side, the exit of this pandemic, and what school can be like, and I think discussion we were just having a few minutes ago was this is, you got to make the most of a good crisis, without being crass about it. And obviously acknowledging all the challenges people are going through. But also, I think we have a beautiful opportunity to rethink education almost from the ground up here. And that's the conversation I'm so excited about having with people like you. So there's a little potted history, Steve.
Yeah, awesome, mate, and appreciate it. And obviously exchange method, which is a method that I've shared with you on appreciative inquiry, which has a lot of positive psychology that comes through that, and the whole flourishing, like the flourishing of students and teachers. And what's the definition? Let's just use Geelong Grammar, and obviously you speak all around the world, but what's the definition to a student around flourishing? Like, what does it mean to them to flourish? Like, it's quite a fluffy word. So a 15-year-old or 16-year-old kid, or young adult, I should say, owning a schoolies company, we never called them kids, so I should not, the young adults. What does that mean to them, like at Geelong Grammar?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we try and avoid using jargon wherever we can. And I think flourishing is jargonistic to some extent. I mean, it's not even an English word. It comes from the French word flirt, meaning flower. So it's really talking about humans as flowers. Like it's a bizarre, kind of strange, nebulous concept. Yet it's something we understand intuitively. But for kids, we break it down. The narrowest, kind of simplest version that we use with students is that flourishing is about feeling good and doing good. So it's about the concept that you subjectively feel in a good state, and that you contribute meaningfully to the lives of others in a self-augmenting way. So the better we feel, the more capable we are of doing good, and the more good we feel, the more good we do, the better we feel. And so there's a self-perpetuating virtuous cycle that occurs when we're feeling good and doing good. And so that's the simplest version. The other way, with more senior students, I guess we talk about the concept of contributing to making the world a better place. The United Nations came together 10 years ago and created the Sustainable Development Goals, which was the first time really the human species had come together and created these specific set of tangible, measurable goals that, really said as a human species where we want to be in 5-10 years time. And therefore, schooling really is about producing young people who can contribute to that vision of a future world, and therefore a flourishing student is one who has the skills and capacities to meaningfully contribute to moving our species into a better place. So it really is about contributing to making the world a better place by developing a set of skills and strategies and knowledge that enable you to do that, but also enable you to sustain that through challenging times. And that's where a flourishing human certainly isn't one that's happy and laughing and giggling all the time. Right now, the conversation we had before this little chat, Steve, is this time sucks. Like, it's hard, we're struggling, and yet it's kind of enlivening as well. So this is not a happy, fun time, but I feel at the moment that, and like all people, my life ebbs and flows and we have ups and downs, but I feel like I am flourishing. It sucks and I'm cooped up at home, and, we can't go, the footy's cancelled, and, but still the challenge is exciting. And so flourishing is also about being resilient and being able to overcome challenge in really difficult times.
Yeah, man, it's powerful. And for anyone that hasn't checked out, like I'm sure most people checked out like the UN development goals, but I've only literally dived deep into them the last 12-18 months, being part of a community called Maverick, and they literally built Maverick, a community of entrepreneurs coming together on the UN goals. And I think that's just so powerful to be able to, as you said, the species coming together. Like, we're talking all of the elders that have the whole reach and the impact to be able to make the pivotal change into a better world. People should dive into it, because I'm seeing more and more that education and companies are literally like the backbone, and their spine of their business is based on the UN goals. And I think we all align to that. It's super powerful. With positivity, like, it's such a buzzword. You've got to be positive, but let's, for a moment, and as you said, don't beat behind the bush. It's just it does right now. It does suck. It's like parts of our freedom have been taken away overnight in regards to going to a sports match or going for a swim in New Zealand. You can't swim or surf right now. So how are adults or parents some coping mechanisms to stay positive And then on the other side, young people between the ages of 12 to 18, let's just look at that. That's your sweet spot. I feel like the students right now are flourishing big time. They're actually thriving. They're not totally deprived of that human connection because they're so connected on social media, and we've been plastered with this like social media is bad for us, screen time is bad for us, all of this. But actually, they're so connected right now. I feel so connected in a sense of belonging right now more than I ever have, because I'm having these conversations that I probably wouldn't have, or it will probably take us longer to connect offline because we've got so many moving parts, traffic, getting to school, this and that. It's so much easier to have a one-on-one conversation. Sorry, that was a very broad, but yeah, how do we stay positive when we've been this crisis mode right now?
Yeah, it's a great question, and that's I think where that's the exact question our team is trying to answer at the moment, because most of my work for the last 5 years has involved, flying around the world, traveling, going into schools, delivering consultancy services and advice to school leaders who are, running these huge, large organizations of hundreds or thousands of people, sometimes in these large schools and stuff. Obviously, that's disappeared, as you said, kind of in a flash overnight. And so we've been able to pivot really our thinking and our whole team to start answering that question of how can we help people who are now not in schools, not in these bricks and mortar places, but are at home trying to sustain some sense of normalcy and, normality. And, so I think a couple of practical things we've been looking at and working on and writing about is firstly to normalize this, try and keep it, to maintain perspective by normalizing this. This is a really challenging situation, but it's also about maintaining perspective. And for some people around the world, it's a devastating experience. For others, it's okay. But whatever situation we're in, we have this incredible human mind and body that's built exactly for this. We have a very resilient, incredibly resilient biology and neurology. And really, humans were created in a situation where we evolved starving on the African savanna land, where there was never enough food. We were constantly in battles and fights for survival. We're built for this kind of situation. And I think if we can just settle ourselves, not get carried away with the situation, we find that we have an incredible wealth of resource to cope with whatever situation we find ourselves in. So in part, let me give 3 quick practical strategies that we think are really effective, that are completely within our control, and that we're finding are having a big impact for both parents at home with children, for adults at home by themselves, but also for young and older students. And the first one is exercise. And this has been written about a lot. It's been studied. It's being talked about a lot at the moment. But exercise is, for most people who have a relatively healthy body, completely within our control. What we're suggesting is that we know exercise is always important, but at the moment, really we're trying to double down, suggesting people double down on exercise. Now, that doesn't mean you go out and try and run a marathon each day, but it means whatever fits you, suits your capacity, whatever interests you, but make sure we're doing daily exercise. And exercise isn't really about our body, and Dr. John Ratey wrote one of my favorite books in this field called Spark, where he argues that, of course, exercise is kind of healthy for our body, but actually exercise for our brain. Human activity literally causes our human brain. The only reliable trigger for neurogenesis, which is the creation of new brain cells, is exercise. Like exercise is so nourishing for our brain, not only in creating new brain cells, but also in regulating our brain chemistry. So exercise is such an important tool for us that we can use to deregulate kind of the stress experience we're having. It's good for our body, but also and good for our immune system, but also really good for our brain to help regulate our emotional experience and make sure we're able to see the positive in what's occurring, or to keep perspective. The second one is around gratitude, and gratitude kind of has this, I don't know, soft concept. For many people, gratitude's a nice kind of thing that, someone gives you a present, you say thank you. But gratitude is a really powerful way, again, of keeping perspective. Dr. Kerry Howes at the moment from the University of Tasmania is 7 days into a 30-day challenge where she's, if you're interested in gratitude, Dr. Kerry Howes, if you Google her, she's one of the world's leading researchers, professors in the field of gratitude. What we're finding neurologically when we're engaging in gratitude is, again, a resetting of a whole lot of neural circuitry that focuses, that helps us think about our experience in a different way. It helps reset our perspective. It helps create a new narrative for what we're experiencing. And despite what we're all going through in our unique ways, we all have things to be grateful for. And we certainly, what we know about human cognition is we can't turn it off. We can't stop thinking about the negative stuff, but we can choose to think about positive experiences. And when we choose to focus on positive experiences, that enables a whole different way of thinking and experiencing the world. So gratitude experiences like keeping a daily journal, writing things down, particularly going around the dining room table at night time and sharing with your family 1 or 2 things that have happened during the day that's been good for you, can be a really powerful experience. And the third one, Steve, third little practical strategy that I'm sure you know a lot about and probably enjoy a lot is this concept of flow. And flow experiences are where we become completely immersed in an experience. Some people, I experience flow. I'm not very good at skiing or snowboarding, but when I snowboard, I experience these flow states where I get completely lost in experience. I also create electronic dance music as a little hobby. And so when I kind of sit down with my little laptop keyboard, and I kind of just get lost in this world of electronic music. Flow experience, we don't have time to go into the neurology and the psychology of flow experiences, but the concept of getting lost in an experience, an activity that feels good for its own sake, where you're not being paid to do it, but you do it because it feels amazing and you can completely immerse, completely focus your attention on an activity, plays such a pivotal role in many ways, both biologically and neurologically. So flow not only feels good, but it forces us into the moment. You can't be in flow unless you're entirely focused on the moment, and it requires us to move forward towards a goal. And when we start getting lost in an experience that matters to us, whether it's knitting or sewing or reading, having a great conversation or cooking or whatever it is that you kind of can get lost in, forces us into the moment, forces us to set really nice, manageable goals that we move towards. And what we're starting to understand about the brain's dopamine system actually is that we get this kind of boost of dopamine, not only when we achieve a goal, like getting food or a mating partner or sleep, not only do we, when we achieve a goal, do we get this dopamine rush, but also when we move towards a goal. And that's partly why flow feels so amazing, is that we're sitting down with a little goal of creating a dance music track or creating a nice pumpkin soup, whatever it is. And as we take step by step, start cutting up the onion towards that soup, we get this dopamine experience, which makes us feel good, makes us feel positive, makes us feel more hopeful and optimistic. So all of those things are really positive and enable us to focus on something and move forward in a hopeful, optimistic way. So there's a couple of little strategies that maybe anyone at home can think about in their own way and maybe continue to remain positive despite some of the challenges.
Man, that's super powerful. Yeah. So exercise 100%. And I know meditation for me right now is, I wouldn't say is flowing. And just because I've got the 3 kids around, so it's hard. And I just, sometimes meditation, like everyone's like meditation is the cure to everything. Sometimes it's hard and it's difficult, and sometimes it gets boring. So finding other things that will do the similar. So for me, exercise, like it is my meditation, whereas Sarah, meditation is big, like that's her every single day. Whereas me, exercise every day. And then going on to the gratitude thing, as you said, yeah, being able to dive deeper into gratitude versus going, I was really grateful for the sunny day today. Like, how do you dive deeper in the gratitude? And then flow, you'll love it. Literally in 2 days' time, I've got a call with Jackie Nutchell, a good friend of mine, who is the founder of the Flow Consciousness Institute. I don't know if you've come across it, but
I don't know Jackie. No.
Yeah, and something I've really struggled with to get into flow, because my flow back it was sport, playing sport.
Yeah.
And And I think a lot of people have been probably removed from flow right now, like surfing and watching a lot of documentaries around surf and skiing, those type of activities where people just get lost. But you brought up the whole pumpkin soup thing, and being able to create something and follow a recipe. For me, I found that's my flow right now when I'm in isolation. So getting the Marley and spoon, which I think is in Australia, here it's World on a Plate, being able to follow a recipe and produce something great on a plate that you eat, it just becomes a whole new experience, and you do get lost in cooking a meal. So what would be one piece of advice to try and find your flow? A lot of people out there is like, I've never felt it before, like what is it? And a lot of people classify flow to sport or an activity versus like, you know what, we can find a lot of flow in different areas. So what would be your thought?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think flow is misunderstood by a lot of people, and they think it's all about this adrenaline junkie stuff, or it's surfing, or what, and obviously those experiences are the classic version that we often talk about or hear about. Stephen Kotler, who's the founder of the Flow Genome Project, in his book The Rise of Superman, effectively writes that these guys that are surfing 100-foot waves or jumping over, Danny Way, who jumped over the Great Wall of China on a skateboard, they're doing things humans can't do, right? A human can't do that, but they're doing it. Flow literally creates a superhuman version of ourselves because the neurochemical cascade that triggers through our brain and body and creates this incredible focus. And so obviously those big things, jumping over the Great Wall of China on a skateboard, are headline grabbing kind of things that we can talk about. But actually, research looking at professionals, and especially people in education, suggests that a professional teacher, for example, will be in flow approximately just under around 50% of their day. They're in a flow state. So they're not, they're not jumping over Great Wall of China, but they're in this complete immersive state of attentional focus. So flow is really the number one precondition for flow. Number one criteria for flow, or trigger for flow, is bringing your attention onto one specific task. So it's the opposite of multitasking. So when we really, as you said, following a Marley spoon recipe, to do that really well, we have a very specific goal. We have a nice little feedback loop where we're going to learn, we're going to realize pretty quickly if it's not working. And if you choose to really zoom in your attention, you can certainly experience a flow state, which is this completely immersive, dopamine triggered kind of experience. And it's not only dopamine that gets released, it's also anandamide is one of the neurochemicals that pops up at the front end of a flow experience. And anandamide creates, it's an endogenous cannabinoid. It creates this very kind of expansive thinking state that is also triggered when people choose to smoke marijuana. The same cannabinoid receptors are triggered in the human brain as when we're in flow states. This kind of lateral creative thinking gets triggered. So to get into a flow state, all we need is to really choose to suppress our spontaneity, to really focus our attention on something and not just get carried away with whatever else is happening around us, but to choose to focus our awareness, to have a very specific goal with feedback, and then to engage fully with that experience. And we get this neurochemical cascade of dopamine, serotonin, noradrenaline, anandamide. And at the back end, actually, interesting, you were talking about meditation, Steve. The back end of a flow experience, kind of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, sometimes longer into a flow experience, endorphins are also released as part of the neurochemical experience and the hormonal experience. And endorphins are actually quite a different experience. We feel them quite, they're a natural painkiller. But one of the cool things about flow is at the back end of flow, it is very meditative, is actually some of the language you sometimes use when talking about flow. And that is, the reason it's called flow is because our behaviors begin to just kind of cycle automatically. And when you're climbing a mountain or you're snowboarding or you're surfing, or you're just mixing the soup and your hands and it feels, you're mixing the pumpkin soup and somehow it just feels like you're fully in the moment of stirring. And it's stupid. You're stirring with a wooden spoon.
I need to go over for some pumpkin soup, mate.
So flow is that you can choose. It doesn't have to be these big experiences. And it is such a beautiful way to to focus on a positive experience. You come out the other end. My wife's been trying to learn sewing, and so she just locks herself with a sewing machine in the room at 7:30 each night. I put the kids to bed, and she does half an hour of just sewing, just for the sake of it. And she comes by 8 o'clock. Feels different because she's had a completely different psychological, social, and neurological experience, and she's a different woman 30 minutes later because of what flow does to us. So yeah, certainly encourage people to think about that deeply and to try and find time to create that.
And I think being able to giving yourself, and I think this time has given us permission to experiment and play with things, or play in curiosity and wonder is obviously what we talk about, wonder and wonder, but
yes,
giving yourself the permission to experiment. And part of when we're in our busyness of lives, and a lot of people suffer from perfectionism. I'm one of them. Is just like, now we've actually got permission to experiment, and just momentum wise. And the difference between me and Sarah's very quick to action and bring something to life and iterate versus Steve, detailed, build, hold, and then the industry's gone. That's so right now I think it's super to experiment. You might not get in flow when you're cooking the recipe. Go and try something else. And I think that's literally giving us the permission right now, the environment we are in, to go and experiment. A friend of mine, Tucker Max, who owns Scribe Media, as his vision is everyone on the planet should write a story. Everyone's got a story to share and tell. He owns a publishing company, and he did a free webinar about how to write your first book, and 4,000 people turned up about writing their first book. So because people want to experiment, they're like, oh, great, you give me permission, you're giving me the tool to try something. And obviously this is going to come back around to education, is that maybe education and the brick and mortar, as you said, if we look back to parents and grandparents, it was a production line to get people out to a certain level. Versus now is that there is, I don't know how many different types of industries and jobs versus our grandparents. It's like people who don't actually have the time in the day or the classroom to experiment on these new industries. I know it's trying to happen with coding and this, but by the time coding is brought into the school, there's already something else. So what's your kind of feeling around this whole curiosity and wonder and schools that literally lights people up and go and experiment for that for 30? And I know there's schools out there that are way off to the right, literally is like, go and play and enjoy that play. But what's your thoughts around experimentation and this new form of education that's going to evolve?
Yeah, I love the way you think about that, Steve. I love the concept of the opportunities that we have forced upon us, by this kind of circuit break that's occurred for us. I think what I'm seeing, in schools, in some of the leading schools around the world, is a recognition that was already occurring, but I think is about to be accelerated. And that recognition is that schools have to find a new purpose. I've got a 4-year-old at home at the moment, nearly 5, Hudson, and he was going to school at Geelong Grammar this year until the COVID crisis happened, and now he's at home and he's using Khan Academy, and my wife's at home, sort of homeschooling Hudson. He's learning to read very rapidly using Khan Academy as a sort of 5-year-old, and Khan Academy is brilliant. And if you just want to consume content, if you want to learn algebra, my kind of guess is that you can learn algebra faster on Khan Academy probably than most maths teachers can teach. It is a brilliantly designed piece of technology that is gamified, it's exciting. And if you just want to drill content or drill a skill into a kid, Khan Academy is probably as good as any maths teacher you're going to have, or you're going to find, if you want to learn a discrete skill. And the same thing we're sort of seeing on Zoom, and that at the moment with Zoom and virtual learning, is that, it's pretty hard to justify a teacher, or, let's take Geelong Grammar, for example, in year 10, 11, 12, students are studying maths. And in a typical setting, like in this classroom, normally you'd have 20 kids and a teacher, and that one teacher is teaching math, teaching the kids algebra. Next door, there's another teacher teaching the same lesson on algebra. Next door, there's 5 lessons happening at once, all learning algebra from 5 different teachers. Yeah. And that sort of makes sense in traditional schooling, and you get the benefit of a relatively small group and kind of a relationship develops between the students. You get this kind of little community of 20 kids in a classroom and stuff. So you can see the benefits. But once we go remote, like once we open up the world, I know my teacher here that's normally in this classroom is pretty good, but there's some amazing professor at Harvard who is going to be better at drilling the skill of learning algebra than any normal classroom teacher, maybe, So there's always going to be some brilliant instructor that we can consume knowledge from more effectively than a normal classroom teacher, perhaps, right? So this concept of who can deliver content or who can enable students to consume the learning of skills, or, that question is being disrupted significantly at the moment. And so I think there's this big recognition that schools can no longer really just be about learning algebra, learning discrete skills. Because the question is, why are we learning algebra? And schools have never really addressed that effectively. They've always been, the answer to that question, why are we learning algebra, is because you needed to get into university. That's ultimately kind of been the fallback position. I think what we're realizing now is schools have to answer the bigger question of why are we doing school? Like, because Hudson could just stay at home with his mum for the next 10 years and he'll learn to read and write real effectively on Khan Academy. So why would we bother sending him to school? It's got to be something more than just the learning of skills and knowledge, right? And I think what we're seeing in really cutting edge progressive schools is the recognition that the purpose of schooling is to, in my opinion, the purpose of schooling is to inspire students to solve interesting, important problems. To inspire this desire of curiosity, like to ask the question, could that be done better? Not only ask the question, but then have the capacity to somehow work out a way forward, the first step forward. And that's where I think schools can do what no other place on earth can do, and that is bring together children, unlock this curiosity and enable them to work together to solve a problem that no single human could ever solve. And I think this is where project-based learning and the International Baccalaureate, which is much more about, students pursuing passions that they have and diving deeply into these passionate problems, and trying to think creatively and constructively. I think what we're starting to see is schools recognizing that's the role schools have to have, is not really teaching algebra, but it's teaching algebra in order to unlock this capacity to solve interesting, important problems. And the most interesting, important problems we have are the Sustainable Development Goals. It's world poverty. It's gender inequality. It's lack of sustainable forests. So the biggest human questions, the biggest problems we have will only be solved when we unlock that passionate curiosity that's inherent in children. And I think that's where schools, the purpose of schooling is to prepare our students to solve those important, challenging, really pivotal human problems. And that's where schools are uniquely positioned, because they bring together these young, dynamic minds. And traditionally, we've often repressed that curiosity, to the point where in current schooling in Australia, the pinnacle of education in Australia, the very last thing you do in your educational career in Australia is you get locked in a room with 200 kids and you sit in silence and you're not allowed to talk or help anyone else. And that can't be right. Like, I think the pinnacle of education, what we call cheating now, is really where schools are moving towards. Everything that we used to call cheating, i.e. talking to other kids, helping someone out, sharing your answers, discussing problems, like everything that's called cheating in an exam is actually where schools are moving towards, should be the pinnacle of education. That we come together at the end, not to fight each other, to try and beat someone on a test, but we come together to enhance each other, to augment each other, to co-create solutions to challenging, important problems. And this is where schools have been tinkering around the edges, but I think there will be a shift towards mainstream schooling going this way as well. We've also seen the cancellation of exams, like end of school exams across Europe and in the UK. Probably in Australia, we'll see the same. That and New Zealand, I imagine this year as well, that interview examinations for year 11, 12 students will be cancelled probably. And we'll see what happens. Will the world fall apart? What will Auckland University do? What will University of Sydney do when there's no test scores to rank kids on? So I think we've been shifted, in this experience we're going through, this natural experiment, this natural disruption will enable us to have conversations that we couldn't really have 6 months ago because people's heads exploded. But now we have the capacity, we have the space, the opportunity, as you were saying, Steve, to have these conversations.
I'm totally with that, but it is the light switch. It's like it needed something like this to happen, because otherwise, yes, there is a lot of discussion and we have to move. And a prime example in corporate, like Sarah's back in NAB, head of change, and 2 weeks after starting the job, this thing happens. There's 35,000 employees, and that she was coming into the organization to help with change and move to the new frontier. That just put on hyperspeed. It's like, well, we have 35,000 people that can't go to work today. So, and there's only X amount of licenses, and we're not. So, literally, I think it was, don't quote me, but it was like a 3-year project that got turned around in 10 days. And they're like, wow, this is awesome. So, as you said, the opportunity and the excitement, but we needed this switch in all industries. And as I said before we got on the call, it's like Blockbuster didn't go out of business because of Netflix. They went out of business because they didn't evolve and they didn't innovate at the time when they came along. They got complacent. And that's the risk of, I see the chat and the negativity and optimism on Facebook, and you're like, and there's a great guy, and I'll share it as well, Simon Bowen from Perth, around models method. And there's the red line, people that are like, okay, we'll wave this through and we'll just wait till we get through it. And it goes down like this. And then you got the amber line, which people are just like, okay, I'll try and I'll sit on this line. And then you got the green line, people is like, okay, this is giving me a chance to innovate and jump in the life raft or provide someone a life raft, so then they can thrive on the outside. And I was like, wow, this whole models method is really interesting. But I think the whole school system, and I was really fortunate to have a scholarship, and school wasn't for me. I left Auckland Grammar, a great school in New Zealand, at 16. Headmaster was like, school's not for you and hockey's not going to pay the bills. I was just a curious human that loved to travel, and hockey gave me that opportunity to go and travel and lean into my curiosity. Because you're right, because you get into these schools or education, and it's the two S's, siloed and status. And I'm like, how do you remove silo and status? Yes, there's schools are the sense of community, connection and belonging, which we didn't think we could get online. But what I'm seeing online with some incredible communities across the globe, that people are feeling more connected and more belonged in this time than they ever have in live experiences. And for someone that's in live experiences, and I woke up one morning and travel was cancelled for 6 months, and that is my business. Part of me was like, oh shit, what do I do? And you do go through this, how do I pivot? How do I innovate? And you go through all the feelings of uncertainty, fear, and anxiety, whatever, to know that there's other people out there going through the same thing. Live experiences, and this, what Simon said, is that your true genius is around live experiences and bringing people together. There's still live experiences. There's happening more live experiences. They're not happening in a room. They're happening in Zoom. There's no difference between Zoom and room. And I was like, oh, wow, literally some mic drops in the last 24 hours. And I think that's where education is going. You've, as you said, Khan Academy and all of these, but the schools can be the curiosity incubators. And that whole, the evolution of cheating. Oh, man, that's going to be a great paper to read. Collaborate.
I love it. Yeah.
Collaborate rapid, like we facilitate whole system change, which Exchange does. I'm just reading on the other screen, is that, like, imagine the school getting collaboratively together and co-creating, as you said, the future, the new frontiers. Like, let's just scrap what's happened before, and we don't have any tests, so everyone's on an equal playing level starting 2021, because we don't have anything from 2020 and exam results. It's really, really exciting. So for you, what's that champagne moment that if you like, in 12 months time, sitting at the middle of 2021, what would be like a champagne moment for you if you had that magic wand to go, this what schools are doing right now, and I'm excited to be part of the transition?
Yeah, I think I think what has been holding schools back, and look, I think you and I we're very open, very progressive, thinkers, and we have the capacity to do it because we have our roles enable us to think differently. I also have a lot of compassion, empathy for school leaders who are in schools like Geelong Grammar School, other schools where there's 160 years of tradition and all sorts of government regulation and expectations. And so it's fine for us to have this nice conversation. And then when kind of the reality sinks in, or these constraints that school leaders work within kind of comes back into the conversation, it all seems too hard. And I think what's the fundamental anchor that's been keeping us stuck in this kind of status quo, this old school way of thinking, is largely this the tertiary entrance into university in most countries around the world still is dependent on some sort of testing or scores that come out of high school, right? So still in Australia, which is one of the strictest systems in the world still, where, you know, University of Melbourne, for example, effectively demands that schools test their students in a silent exam room where all of those 21st century thinking skills that you've been talking about, they suddenly are now called cheating. So you lock these kids in a room for 2 hours, they sit in silence, answer the test, and then you rank the kids, and then you submit that ranking to Melbourne University, and Melbourne University says, thanks, we'll take the top 3, and they'll go into medicine, and the next 3 will go into law. And so the only reason that we do tests and exams in schools is because University of Melbourne asked us to. Not just University of Melbourne, just using them but the tertiary system demands that. There's no teacher in the world who thinks it's a good educative experience. Like, no one thinks, oh, that's a beautiful way to finish school, is to get kids to sit in silence and not help and to try and beat each other in a test. Like, the only reason we do that is for the tertiary entrance system. I think once that starts to crumble, and we're starting to see evidence of it a little bit with different sideways parallel entry into different universities, including some pinnacle kind of, large mainstream universities, and, all sorts of different avenues of getting into these universities, apart from just the ATAR score or the ranking. I think once that starts to crumble, then we have this freedom where educators can take back their own profession. I think we as educators, I don't teach in a classroom anymore. I did for 15 years. I was a classroom teacher, and I was, pretty good as a teacher. Felt I always had pretty good control of my content, and I enjoyed teaching and stuff. I was okay as a teacher, but I never felt that I owned the profession. The profession is owned by experts, it's owned by government, it's owned by universities. We're told there's no sense of autonomy, like there's no ownership of our own profession. And teachers are brilliant at their jobs by and large. Their incredible capacity to understand young children and bring out the best, but we're not recognized. We don't have any ownership of that space. And I think once we start to see that tertiary mandate or that tertiary kind of system collapse a bit, and we start to think differently about the type of students we want to allow into university, and we start thinking about the types of attributes and skills and behaviors that we're looking for in students rather than just test memorization. I think we free up the whole industry and the whole profession, and teachers can engage in this kind of work that enables children to be children, to harness the beauty in youth, instead of crushing it or instead of trying to channel it into a test. I think that's the champagne moment for me, and we might just see it this year. I think there's this weird opportunity where if we cancel tests, and if universities just start to open up a little bit and think maybe there's a different way to do this, I think then we start to see a big shift in this system. So that would be my champagne moment. In 12 months' time, we're sitting here, and you don't have to get an A on a test to get into the University of Melbourne. There are other ways to get in. And we look at the holistic contribution of the child.
Well, universities and schools, there's going to be blockbusters and there's going to be Netflixes.
That's right. Exactly.
Over the next 12 months, and I'm excited to be on the Netflix side. So I really appreciate all your input and wisdom and just different perspectives on education, and that we could literally go down another rabbit hole with whole positive positive education is just not in the classroom. It's literally positive education spans into parenting, it spans into relationships, like the whole works, and also another conversation around flow and what is flow teaching, flow parenting. As you said, teachers can get into flow, but some of them have lost it. But it comes down to, I think, curiosity in the classroom is being bottled up. So the excitement in the student and the excitement in the teacher is bottled by, literally, there's a couple of things. If you ignite curiosity back in the classroom and give the permission back to the teacher to be curious and try new things. And I'm surrounded by teachers. Like Sarah's mum's an amazing maths teacher, and she's a teacher in her own right, just with the wonder side of things. So really appreciate all the wisdom. I can't wait to be sharing a champagne moment with you next year, because I know we're going to co-create something together with like Evolve Schools, which literally has obviously been in the schoolies, 25,000 18-year-olds in their school leaver, and seeing, feeling what they go through into transition into university and how they don't like it either. So no one likes it, but they're just forced. And then also creating these business retreats and everything to finally get to a Evolve Schools program, which I'd love to invite you onto a call. I've literally got 30 people coming together to like Evolve Schools. What's it about? Like, we got to give people wings again, which is W, wonder, I for innovation, N for network. Like, imagine growing your network and relationships at school before you get out. We're not taught how to network and build relationships at school. And then G is really understanding what's growth, whether it's, there's so many growth factors that we can bring in, positivity, blah, blah, blah. And then S, which is for strengths. Really, like, what testing we should be doing is understanding more about yourself versus what you're putting on paper. Like, what are your strengths? Like, it might be building, so why are you doing accounting? It's just like, and so, I can't wait to keep talking about that. But thanks everyone for tuning in, and I'll stop this live. I'll put some links onto all the work and some flow stuff, and I'll get some links off Dave to be able to share around. So thanks again for the chat.